Hey, welcome to Reading with Mo, and today we're going to be talking about the books that I was able to finish in the month of February. I think there were about 13 books that I got to in February. Let me double count. There were a total of 13 books that I got to in the month of February. One of them was actually DNF, and I own physical copies of 4 of the ones I was able to get to. So let's go ahead and talk about what I read last month. I didn't quite read. Well, I know I got to a lot of books in February, but I didn't get to as many as I wanted to because I was sick during some of that month. Actually, a lot of the month I was sick. I was sick twice last month. But for being sick, I actually was able to read a lot of books. And so the first one, I'll just start with the ones I physically have here. This one is an ARC copy of Hungry Ghosts by Kevin Jared Hossein. I actually got the audiobook to listen to as well from my library. Technically, I finished this like the first day of March, like the last 50 pages, but I'm going to go ahead and just talk about it during my February wrap up while my thoughts on it are still fresh. I gave this book a 4-star rating. This is a book set in Trinidad in the 1940s, and we are following a cast of different characters that are living in this village called Bell Village. The main two locations are the Changor farm where Marley and her husband Dalton live, and then we have down in the village in the barracks this ramshackle building, these families that are very poor, and we are following the couple there as well as their son. We have some other players as well, like the son's friends that he made and other people that live in their same building with them. What sets off the plot of this book is when Dalton, Marley's husband, goes missing and she decides not to say anything, and she starts getting these threatening things happening to her. The husband of the couple with the kid in the main village is one of the people who works for her husband on their property. He ends up becoming a night watchman for them, and that also sets off a series of events that affect everybody in the village. I really enjoyed this book. I think it's the author's debut novel, so I'm definitely going to have to pick up other books by this author because I really enjoyed it. I am very glad that I picked this up. The writing was very good. The audiobook was good, but I feel like I enjoyed the book more when I was reading it physically, so I ended up reading most of this book physically. I didn't really listen to the audiobook too much. Through the lives of these families, we end up learning a lot of history about Trinidad and about their religions and class and family, historical violence. I really enjoyed it, and I feel like the writing itself was beautiful, so I would recommend it to you guys. Then we have Wade in the Water by Nyani Nkrumah. This book was another new release, and this one I actually ended up listening to most of this one on audiobook. This is a literary debut, but for a debut novel, it was very good. This was a 4-star rating. I feel like I had a lot of good high ratings in the month of February. Unfortunately, I did not have any 5-star reads again. So I'm hoping March is the month that will break that streak. I actually can't even remember the last book that I gave 5 stars to. But in this book, we are following 2 separate characters and storylines. One of them takes place in the summer of 1982. We're following a young girl. Her name's Ella, and she lives, she's 11 years old. She lives in a small town where it's set in the 80s. Even though it's set in the 80s, there's definitely a lot of prejudice going on in this town. There's kind of like a white and a black side of the town. And she lives with her stepfather who resents her, her mother who can't even stand to look at her, and her siblings. There's this mysterious white woman that moves in across the street from her that sets off a whole series of events that changes everybody's lives. We are also following a separate storyline of another woman who, I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything, but she is growing up with a father who is part of the KKK. And that is another storyline that is wrapped up with this one. So altogether, I really enjoyed this book, and I also would recommend to you guys. Don't worry, I didn't like every book I read during the month. I will have some books that I have things to say that I didn't like them. But the next one was surprisingly also another book that, well, not surprisingly, because I pretty much good idea that I was going to enjoy this one. And this is Island Beneath the Sea by Isabel Allende. This book is a book in translation. The translator is Margaret Sayers Piren. In January, I read Inez of My Soul by Isabel Allende, and I already knew, I really love her writing style. So I had a high expectations I was going to enjoy this book, and they were filled. I gave this book about a 4.5 star rating. I really enjoyed it. We are following a very interesting cast of characters in this book. Our main character, her name is Zarite, and people call her Tete. She was born a slave on the island of Saint-Domingue, which eventually goes on to become Haiti. She's the daughter of an African mother and a white sailor. This book kind of starts off this book takes place around 1770 when Toulouse-Valmorin, who he arrives on the island to run his father's plantation. He gets involved with her as a teenager. She is one of the slaves on this plantation. Then we end up following the next 4 decades of their lives. We really see everything going on through their lives. We follow both of their perspectives, as well as I think there was like a few other characters that we kind of get to see a little bit more into their lives as well. But everybody in this book just felt so like real to me. Like they felt like someone who could be real in history. And this book is based off of fictional characters, but it's not hard to imagine that there were people like these characters in this book that actually existed at one time. I really loved how, similar to Inez of My Soul, I was just really able to learn a lot of history about a place that I didn't know a lot of history about, because during this book we do read and learn a lot about the revolution and rebels that were going on to try to end slavery on this island. And the last book I have a physical copy of that I read was The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I am definitely a John Steinbeck stan when it comes to his writing. I don't really know a lot about him personally, so I don't really know if he's like a problematic person or not. I need to look into that. I will say though that this one was not my favorite John Steinbeck book that I've read. I ended up giving this one about a 3-star rating. It was definitely interesting. I'm realizing I'm reading a lot of historical novels lately, and so with this one, this is set in, what year was this one? This book is set during the Great Depression, and we really learn a lot about American history during this time just from following this one family as they are having to leave their Oklahoma like homestead and stuff behind, and they're being forced to have to travel to California and try to make a life for themselves because of the things that are happening to farmers at that time. While I did enjoy the book, and like I said, I learned a lot about it, this book is written in dialect, the dialogue parts, and I feel like this is a book that I would have benefited from having listened to an audiobook of this novel, because it would have made it a little bit easier to read and process and to hear the dialect actually spoken instead of just seeing it on the page. So because of that, it also made it harder to like really get through the book. I think it took me about like 2 weeks of picking this book up off and on, because it was one that was hard to just like sit there and read for a long time. Like I'd read like 20 pages or something and then I need a break. I will say this book definitely left me with a feeling of like melancholy / depression and stuff. I mean, it makes sense, it's set during the Great Depression, but like reading what the family is going through and them trying to struggle and make a life for themselves and seeing all of the difficulties that they're having to put through, it really made me glad that I was not born during this time and that this is not something that I had to experience. Now let's move on to the books that I was able to read from my Libby app. So firstly, we have an audiobook, and that is Locust Lane by Stefan Amadon. I ended up giving this one a 3-star rating. This is one of those books that just wasn't super memorable to me as far as a mystery thriller goes. It takes place in a small town in Emerson, Massachusetts, in the suburbs. We're in an affluent town, and there's a young woman who's found dead in the nicest part of town, and all the powerful families kind of like close ranks to keep their families safe. But during the investigation, they find out there were 3 teenagers who were partying with her that night, and each of them is a suspect. Like I said, not super memorable. I really can't even remember the ending, to tell you, to be honest. I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe I forgot, and I lied to you guys. I did give a book a 5-star rating last month, and I can't believe I forgot I did. Okay, so Promise Boys by Nick Brooks is my first 5-star read of 2023. Forgive my brain for completely forgetting, but as soon as I seen the cover on it, I was like, wait, I did give a book a 5-star rating. So this is a young adult book, which is surprising because I definitely don't really gravitate towards a lot of young adult books within the past like year or two, although I used to read a ton of them all the time. I picked this one up and on a whim. It was a book that I had seen, it was on my radar for new releases for this year, and I have to tell you, the audiobook production on this was 5-star rating, as well as the book. So we had like this whole full cast of characters, and it was just such a joy to listen to this book. It's a dark academia mystery book. It's set following 3 different characters. This book is set at a prestigious urban promise prep school. And what happens is the principal is murdered at the school, and there are 3 boys who are having to work to try and clear their names because people expect that it's one of the 3 of them who has killed the principal. They each had the means, the motive, and a murder weapon that they could have used. So they have to kind of band together to try to get to the bottom of this and figure out who the real murderer is before one of them or all of them is arrested. But yeah, I cannot recommend the audiobook enough, you guys. If you are going to read this book, definitely listen to the audiobook. I highly recommend, and I definitely cannot believe I forgot that I did give a book a 5-star rating this year. I just hate my brain sometimes. Then we have a book that was a very anticipated read for me, and that was Exiles by Jane Harper. This is the 3rd book in the Aaron Falk series, and I read the previous 2 books before and really enjoyed them. I listened to them on audiobook as well as I did with this one, and we're following our same detective, Aaron Falk, who I kind of wish I had reread the first 2 books. Not that you necessarily need to go into the 3rd one, but I feel like it would have helped give me some context to kind of remember like what's going on in his personal life as he's going into this next mystery. So the main mystery of this book is there is a woman who's gone missing at a festival that everybody goes to, this annual festival in this like wine country area. And she's been missing now for like a year, and she ended up leaving like the baby in the stroller, and she's just gone. They don't know what happened to her, if it was foul play or if she just abandoned her family. So now as we're coming into the book, it's at the 1-year anniversary. So Aaron Falk is visiting this town because he like has a friend there that he's like godson to, and he ends up getting involved in this tight-knit group because one of them was like the husband of the woman that went missing. There's still a lot of questions that are unanswered about this mystery. I enjoyed it. I gave it a 4-star rating. I don't know if I necessarily enjoyed it more than the other 2 books. I was hoping this was going to be a 5-star rating, but still overall I really love this book, and I really love the audiobook narrator who narrates all of these books. Next we have Mame by Jessica George. I ended up giving this book about a 4.5 star rating. I really enjoyed this book. You guys, I listened to it on audiobook, and this is one that I feel like I would maybe potentially want to purchase to keep on my shelves. We're following our main character. Her name's Maddie, and she is living in London. Her mom's not really in the picture much. She spends a lot of her time in Ghana, so she definitely she still manages to be very overbearing though when she does have interactions with her. So she is the primary caretaker of her father, who is suffering from Parkinson's. She has a brother as well, but he doesn't really help out too much, so a lot of it falls on her to, from a young age, a lot of it has fallen on her to basically raise herself and to help her family. She describes herself as a late bloomer because there's just a lot of things in life that living with her parents till a kind of older age, I believe she's in her 30s or like late 20s, that she has not really experienced a lot of things. So she decides that she is going to kind of like just push herself out of her comfort zone and move her life forward. So she ends up getting her own place. She ends up getting into a relationship, changing stuff with her career, all this different stuff. But she finds that doing all these things doesn't necessarily help her feel better about her life. And in fact, it kind of ends up with her feeling worse in a lot of ways because of certain events that happen. I really did love as well the focus on mental health that Maddie goes through with her during her experiences in this book, and overall I just really loved it. I felt like she was a very interesting character to read from, and just like I felt like there was not everything, but there were a lot of things that I felt like personally I could relate to with her as the main character, and I just really enjoyed it, and I will be looking forward to reading other books by Jessica George. Next we have an audiobook I listened to for a mystery, and that was The Drift by C.J. Tudor. This book was very good. This audiobook definitely kept my attention. So we're following 3 different storylines that are going on at the same time. And I can't remember if I told you guys this. I gave it a 4-star rating. I definitely found this very gripping. So we're following 3 people who are going through these like catastrophe survival situations, each different like situations. So one of our perspectives is Hannah. She's been in an accident on the coach that was taking her like through. They were going through this snowstorm. So her and the surviving other students that are on this trapped coach, they have to figure out a way to survive while there's also a brewing virus. Then we're following a former detective. Her name's Meg, and when she wakes up, she's in this cable car that's suspended above a snowstorm and is surrounded by strangers, all in the same uniform as her, and they have no memory of how they got there, and they're all headed to this mysterious place that they only know as the retreat. Then our third person that we're following is Carter, who he is living in this abandoned ski chalet with a few other people as well. They are just trying to survive, and they're manufacturing vaccines against a deadly virus. But when their generator begins to waver, then there is a threat of something that bad's gonna happen. I really enjoyed reading each of these perspectives. I feel like each of them were very tense, and how they kind of come together in the end was very interesting, and I really liked that. I can't really, not giving any spoilers, I just really like the plot device that the author used to connect the different stories together. So this is actually my third CJ Tudor book. I've also read The Chalk Man and The Other People. I eventually would like to get to The Burning Girls and The Hiding Place. Next, we have a book called Strega by Johan Lee Kolm, translated by Saskia Vogel. This is a book that I gave 2 stars to that I definitely should have DNF'd. I was not crazy about it. It was a very short novella, and I feel like that's the only reason why I was continue going, and because I wanted to know what happened in the end. And we're following, it's described as a modern Gothic story, and it takes place in this remote alpine hotel. We're following 9 women who get hired there to go work for the hotel, and no guests end up ever showing up. So it's very weird. And the style that the novel is written in is very like surreal, stream of conscious, not what I like. I should have known from the beginning that I should have just DNF'd it because it was a waste of time, honestly, reading this book. But it was so short, I just kind of wanted to power through to the end. So basically one of the girls goes missing, and that's why I kind of kept reading, because I wanted to see like the mystery, figure out what happened, like to know what was going on, because things were just very weird in this setting. And I just feel like we didn't really get much answers, and I just feel like I didn't really get anything out of this novel, so I would not recommend it to you guys at all. I gave it a 2-star rating, but honestly I probably should give it maybe more like 1 star. While we're on the subject of books that I didn't like, there is a book that I DNF'd. Let's just talk about that one now. I think I got about like a quarter of the way or a third of the way into The Black House by Carol Johnstone. This is described as an atmospheric thriller set on an isolated Scottish island, and for me, I didn't like it. I could tell like I could push through and maybe give it a 3-star rating, but I, for once, was like, I'm gonna DNF a book and I'm gonna do it. And I have a really hard time DNFing books. I don't like doing it. But with this one, I just was like, there's so many other books I was trying to get to at the time that it made it a little bit easier, because I wanted to spend my time just reading other stuff. Like, I can't really tell you too much about the plot, like I said, because I only got like a quarter to a third of the way into it, but I just remember it wasn't really doing anything for me. None of the characters were really that interesting. The setting wasn't that interesting. I felt myself really tuning out from the audiobook, and that's always a sign that I need to DNF. So I'm glad that I made the right decision there. Next, we have a book called The Piano Tuner, and this is by Chang Shen Kuo, and it's a book in translation. It's translated by Howard Goldblatt and Sylvia Lee Chun Lin. This is a book that, looking back, I give it a 3-star rating. Honestly, I probably should have just DNF'd it, kind of in the middle. Like, it was okay, but it's nothing that I feel like is going to stand out to me. We are following this piano tuner and his relationship with a widower. There's a widower who's grieving his wife. She's died young. She started this piano school. She's a piano and violin player, I believe. And we kind of follow the relationship between him and the piano tuner that worked for her, as they both are kind of just like moving on from the grief of having lost, I forget what her name was now. The piano tuner himself is described as being in his 40s, balding and ugly, a loser by any standard, but he was once a musical prodigy. And it's the piano tuner who is really like narrating the novel. I think in the beginning we get a little bit of perspective from the widower, but we are mostly following the story of the piano tuner, which I did like. I am, as someone who is into music and stuff, I found those parts to be pretty interesting, learning about like specifically his profession as a piano tuner. And some parts had promise, but I don't know, just for me, it was just okay. I just feel like this isn't a book that's going to be very memorable to me and stand out to me in the long run. Finally, last but not least, we have The Black Guy Dies First, Horror Cinema from Fodder to Oscar. This is by Robin R. Means Coleman and Mark H. Harris. I listened to this nonfiction book on audiobook, and I ended up giving it a 4-star rating. So if you are into horror cinema, you are going to love this book. I am lightly into horror. Like, I'm into some of it, but not all of it. Like, I'm not really into like the supernatural side of horror. Mysteries, I like stuff that's more on the mystery suspenseful side, like stuff set in at reality. That's my preference for movies in that genre. So there were a lot of books that or movies that were mentioned in this book that I like had heard about or maybe was like a little bit familiar with but hadn't watched myself. So, but if you are someone who has kind of like who is very well watched in a lot of the horror movies, I feel like you would just love this book. Like I really enjoyed it, even having more of, I would say, a limited background knowledge or experience with a lot of these entertainment novel. Oh God, I can't even speak today. A lot of these entertainment movies. I was definitely going into it more so with maybe hoping to get a few movie recommendations, as well as learning just a lot of the history about Black horror, which you definitely get a lot of going back to the start of movies in general, and typically what Black actors' roles were and how they evolved and the different tropes and characters and character archetypes, I think is the word I'm looking for, that they typically fall into. This novel is a very well researched. Like they said, there's like the information and stuff they draw is pulled from like 1,000 different movies, and that is very impressive to me. It didn't even really feel necessarily like you were listening to an audiobook, but more so like a podcast. And it wasn't very long. I was able to get through this within a few days. I was definitely able to come away with a few movie recommendations that I would like to possibly watch in the future. So I definitely got what I was looking for out of this novel, and like I said, I gave it a 4-star rating. I would recommend if you are interested in this topic. So those are all 13 books that I wanted to share with you guys today. I am interested to know what you guys read in February, or if you read any of these books, we can talk about them down below as well. If we had like similar opinions, or if you like thought the complete opposite of me. And that's it for today. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye!